Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're going down a little different path. This time we're going, across the Pacific and checking out what's going on in America with a voice and a face that is very well known to many people who've been following the Truther movement for years. In fact, this fella has been part of the Truther movement since before, well before I knew there was a Truther movement, and he's been at the forefront of it. In fact, you might have seen him on such wonderful places like Alex Jones and the InfoWars shows. He is known as the Info Warrior. Jason Bermas, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Voice of Freedom.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to hearing what life's like in America at the moment. We don't see much other than what the mainstream media are telling us. Telegram is very interesting to us at the moment. We see some pretty interesting scenes coming out of certain cities in America. Flames coming out of manhole covers and streets set alight. This time, not by the protesters, it seems. So, give us a bit of an overview, if you like, of what's happening in the States at the moment.
Well, certainly in more urban areas and certain cities across the United States, I would say you could look obviously at New York City, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Illinois. Due to this mantra of defund the police and also this mantra of catch and release, I saw it firsthand coming to New York State and happening in New York State before I left for Iowa. You had people committing multiple crimes that were being let out that day, sometimes on violent accusations. You had a lot of crime that wasn't being prosecuted in the first place. And now with the economic collapse that we're seeing globally due to the COVID-19 84 nightmare we all lived through, unfortunately, it seems that your country lived through it a little rougher. At least we had some choices here in the United States. I mean, New York State and New York City were starkly different. And then New York State and Iowa were different worlds, my friend. So, that's one of the big things about this country in particular that is important to maintain, and that's separations of power and the power of the state over the federal government. We saw so many different things across the country, but as you know, the media likes to portray things in a manner that everybody, for instance, that I introduce myself to and I say I'm from New York, immediately they go to New York City, right? We've been hammered home from movies and television. And if my fist is New York City, my thumb now hanging, or I'm sorry, is New York State, my thumb now hanging off is barely New York City, geographically. But at the same time, 10 million people live in that little thumb area, and 10 million people live in the rest of my fist. So those are very different worlds. I'd say right now, you're seeing varying degrees of pressure. Again, states are very different with their taxing and laws. So if you're living in California and you're living in Los Angeles or San Francisco, you're paying $7 to $12 a gallon of gas. Forget about diesel. That's happening. Now, if you're living here in Iowa, I can still get, premium for right around $5.20, right? So I can still get not premium for under $5. I think that unfortunately we're going to see these things, but the one thing that remains kind of lockstep throughout is the censorship of the media and digital censorship. And that's not only in this country, but I maintain that it's actually globally at varying degrees. I really don't like when people start talking about Chinese-style censorship. That's over. That's a talking point from 5 years ago. It's just censorship at this point, and it's everywhere.
Yeah. I'm interested to learn about the southern border. We haven't heard very much other than a few months ago it was being overrun. Now, mainstream media once again does absolutely nothing to report it and certainly gets no coverage here in Australia. Is that threat still occurring, or is life returning to normal along the border?
No. Well, the thing is that the reality is it's not a real threat in the sense that, for instance, the talking points for 20 plus years now that we're in 2022 in this war on terror, is we needed secure borders, and that we could have ISIS coming over, and we could have Al Qaeda coming over, and we could have people dragging in dirty bombs or other terrorist networks. That's not even a thought right now, because that was never a real threat. Now they fully turned the Homeland Security / terrorist system their fusion centers, their signature reduction program against the American people. So,
Yeah.
in order to continually economically devastate this country, they want more and more people flooding in. At the same time, you will have pockets of people that may send intelligence assets for whatever reason. That's probably low level. I would assume those people eventually get caught. But you'll also see a criminal element, just because that's what criminal elements do. You know, they want a new transport to get their drugs into this country. They want a new network to traffic human beings. So at the same time, that benefits this global collapse in the sense that it overruns that police force. And at the end of the day, you know, they want order, but they don't want human beings in charge of that order. So as the fourth industrial revolution comes in, they want to bring in more robotics, more automation, and more non-human police force.
Well, I had on my list here, it's a little further down, but now you've brought us to it. Transhumanism is an issue that is really, I suppose, confronting more people in America than in Australia at the moment, and probably, again, more people in Europe. But it is certainly coming solidly to Australia. Do you want to just outline what your experience has been so far with it?
Well, you know, it's something I've been talking about for the better part of 15 plus years in this. And that's because when I first awakened to that I was being lied to on a daily basis, and the American dream and really what I thought of the world was not real, and this happened post 9/11, and certainly not on the day of 9/11. I'd always been somebody that questioned things, but not to the point where I was able to grasp how far along we'd actually gotten in 2001. And when I realized at that point, for instance, there was a family out there, and anybody can look this up, that went on the Today Show, a popular American TV morning show here. And live on television, they decided to get chipped for safety against terrorists. And, you know, there had been rumblings of this forever. But when I saw that clip, I was like, whoa, wait a minute here. Because another thing that I had never taken seriously, because, you know, quite frankly, it was part of my youth, and what maybe not, you know, I didn't have the best family situation, but the churches I grew up in many times were talking about a quote unquote new world order and a chipped populace. And of course, Satan would be at the head of this. So, you know, when you gravitate away from organized religion and those narratives, immediately you dismiss that kind of thing as nonsense. And so the New World Order to me was what I thought Satanists were, which was, you know, the goth kid that was wearing eye makeup in high school and couldn't get laid, right? Kind of a joke, right? And seriously, like that's kind of how you thought about it. And I had been studying 9/11 after I woke up for about 6 months, maybe not even 6 months, maybe a little bit less. And I was literally already kind of a info junkie, right? So I was one of those guys that was pirating stuff before torrents were around. You know, forget about Napster, but there were all these other networks out there, the Nutella network, the Notella network. I was using Kazaa and Morpheus, and this is how I amassed a lot of my 9/11 stuff. Eventually, I come across a download of Alex Jones's 9/11: The Road to Tyranny. Okay, and that was where I saw the clip of, you know, this person. He was talking about life extension technology in the very intro of that, and that there was an elite class that wanted to hoard it for themselves. Again, sounded like science fiction to me. But immediately after watching that film and trying to disprove the majority of it, I wanted to know, after seeing that family, how far along this technology and nanotechnology had really gotten. And I was just shocked. And then I was even more shocked, you know, to start to come to the understanding of what Eisenhower was truly talking about in that military-industrial complex speech, that a scientific elite could really overtake humanity in what would be eventually a spiritual battle. You know, so many things were beyond what I imagined in the open information of genomically changing human beings and other life forms. chimeras, which was the combination of two different types, at least two different types of biological life forms. Eventually, you find out, that CRISPR is kind of commercialized, and these things have been worked on for decades. So it really opened my eyes, and that brings me to where we are today, which is in the throes of a very real fourth industrial revolution.
We're a long way from Dolly the sheep, aren't we?
And that's another thing that we need to acknowledge. In the 90s, it was open that Dolly the sheep, it was a big deal. We cloned a sheep, right? This was the first time that we'd taken a male or a mammalia, a mammal, and cloned it successfully. And, I remember at the time, one of the big hypes, maybe a couple years after, was this Raelian cult that had said that they had actually cloned a human being. And a lot of that got swept under the rug, and whether they did it or not is up for speculation. But let's realize that every single one of us now for almost a decade, if not more, has been eating openly cloned meat, from cattle, to chickens, to you name it. That process, has been commercialized. Okay, it's been consumerized, and the idea that they didn't do that previously underground in black projects is ridiculous. And the idea that you wouldn't do it to human beings or with human life is also ridiculous. So, I'm not one of those guys that gets into the realm of speculation and they're replacing this person with a clone and that person with a clone and all that. But I'm also not naive enough to not realize that technology of actually cloning a human being not only probably has existed and been tested, for decades now.
Yeah. They've been perfecting it for decades, is my belief too.
Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and that was a recent interview I did with the voice of freedom, Carl Liebold. It was a great conversation. It goes on for another 30 minutes plus, but guess what? We talked about things that might be a little naughty on this platform. So come on over to Rumble, Podbean, and Rockfin and check it out over there. Remember, I am a documentary filmmaker. They are all free. And I encourage you to check out Loose Change Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order to Find, and Shade the Motion Picture. Right now, you want to support me. The links are down below. Consider buying me a coffee or making a premium Rockfin subscription where, again, we give away all of our content, but you support this broadcast that is not about left or right, but always about right and wrong.